Hey everyone, Steve here with Phantom History. Thanks so much for checking us out on YouTube, and if you enjoy our content, make sure you subscribe. I also wanted to remind you that Patreon subscribers get access to bonus content, and we have a newsletter that you can subscribe to that will let you know when a new episode drops and when that new bonus content is available. Enjoy this episode. As she laid in her makeshift bed, positioned in the great room of the mansion near downtown St. Louis, Missouri, Betsy tried to will herself to sleep. She was aware of her colleague, uncomfortably positioned on a couch nearby, and she tried not to focus too much on the settling sounds of the old structure. But then there were the footsteps. Even though she knew it was just the two of them in the building, she heard someone approaching. Betsy was well aware of the building's haunted past. In fact, she had studied it thoroughly and had had her fair share of encounters with spirits within the Lemp Mansion. But even sensitives can take only so much. When the footfalls were circling where she tried to sleep, Betsy finally spoke out, telling the entity that she didn't know who it was, nor did she care. She just wanted to sleep. It was only then that the footsteps fell silent. I'm Steve Blanchard. Welcome to Phantom History. One of the most influential and most tragic families in St. Louis history are the Lemps. The descendants of Johann Adam Lemp were practically royalty in the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. But, like with many royal families, their wealth and fame were counterbalanced by family secrets, intriguing personalities, and death. A lot of death. The story of the Lemps begins promising, with an immigrant achieving the American dream and making an historic impact on the city of St. Louis, Missouri that started in the 1930s and continues today. Betsy Bernett Belanger, the Lemp Mansion's historian and paranormal investigator, explains the family's optimistic beginnings.
Well, it actually started with a man by the name of Johann Adam Lemp. Now, he liked to be called Adam, so that's what we'll call him. And Adam was a German immigrant. He came here into the United States in the 1830s. He finally ended up in St. Louis about 1838. Now, he was already a very wealthy man. He also had lots of skills, and one of the skills that he had mastered in Germany was making beer. He was a brewmeister. They call it there, a master brewer. So that's what he really wanted to do, but he had to earn his way. He had to make his name known and so forth and so forth. There's Adam in St. Louis. He opens up a small business operation, a mercantile, they used to call it, a grocery business, which eventually he adds on a room to start serving beer, and he serves the community a beer called German lager beer. No one had ever tasted that before. It was new, and people loved it. They just loved it. So he became very popular, got his name out there, and he closed the business, opened up a brewery. Now, the brewery was called the Western Brewing Company. That he came about 1838. And so the Western Brewing Company was going very strong by the 1850s. And that's how the Lemp Brewery, although it was called the Western Brewery, got its hold on St. Louis back as far back as that.
In 1862, Adam Lemp died of natural causes, and the family business, the brewery, went to his son, William Jacob Lemp. The younger Lemp changed the name of the brewery to the William J. Lemp Brewing Company and relocated it to South St. Louis's Fenton Park neighborhood. William J. Lemp was well liked in the community and was viewed as a philanthropic man and a business genius. While he ran his household and business with an iron fist, he was personable and well liked, especially among his employees, at least until his personality started to shift.
He treated his workers so well. They were German immigrants similar to him, and so they didn't understand some of the way that the United States worked. For instance, the banking system. So he paid them in cash. And he knew every one of their names. He knew their family history. He could ask them questions about their families, and they adored him. And that's when they knew something was wrong after he went through this deep depression and he withdrew from them. And he didn't know them anymore. And he was very withdrawn and distracted, they said. William took his life on February 13th, 1904. That was at the Lemp Mansion, the first suicide in the Lemp Mansion. It was upstairs on the second floor in his bedroom. And no one thought that he was contemplating suicide because he had been so withdrawn, and he spent a lot of his time in his room or reading in the library or some, he just, he didn't venture out very much, and he didn't communicate with people. So in the morning when he told his wife he wasn't feeling well and going back to lay down, she really didn't think anything of it and went ahead and left the house to do the daily shopping that she had to do. He went back upstairs and he took his life. He shot himself in the head, but he didn't die right away. In fact, he lingered for a little bit. He died before they left the house, before they took him away from the house, I should say. But he was still alive when they found him. The servants heard the noise, and they were the only ones in the house besides him. And then they called his sons, who broke down the door and discovered their father's body. The wife came home. Julia came home. She cradled him in her arms, and he died. It kind of set a precedent, I guess you might call it, for the rest of the family.
William's depression was fueled by the death of his son, Frederick, who died in his late 20s. Frederick is believed to have had tuberculosis and died of heart failure in December of 1901. Frederick, the fourth son, was William's favorite and the one he had hoped would take over the family business. Just 3 years later, in January of 1904, William's best friend, Frederick Pabst, died, which likely led to William's suicide. That suicide in February of 1904 was the first of 3 to occur in the house and the first of 4 suicides total for the family. The spirits of those tragic deaths are still in the mansion, according to Betsy.
Some people just probably could say they just sit there and all these images and things float to them and they see them and everything, which could be. But I listen and I'm quiet and I can sit in a room I used to more than I do now. And so I listen to what's being said to me. So I've gotten some communications through that, some communications through my own questions. We have the 5 senses that we all know and love, like hearing and seeing and tasting, and I always forget one, but the 6th sense comes into play with that too, and we all have that as well. And that's our ability to communicate or to be involved with things that are around us, the paranormal, the other than normal, and that would bring in being able to communicate with other beings. Now, I also consider myself a spiritualist, which is someone who does communicate with the dead.
Betsy says that one of the spirits who communicates with her directly is Billy Lemp, who took over the family business after the suicide of his father in 1904 and ran it until he sold the complex in 1920. He had difficulty adjusting to the new way of doing business and was consistently quoted as saying, "If it was good enough for my father, it's good enough for me." In hindsight, it's not surprising that he too ended his life by suicide in the mansion in 1922.
He was a very complicated man. He was a very brutal man at times, so it's been reported from some of the things that he was involved in, from animal fights in the prairie to other things. He would carry a gun with him all the time, but he also would refer back constantly, "If it's good enough for my father, it's good enough for me." So that could have meant so many different things, from carrying that gun, laying the gun on the dinner table. So now he did it so the servants would move quicker. When William Sr. did it, it was so he could control the conversation. And then also to the suicide. If it's good enough for my father, it's good enough for me.
His own physical ailments, pressure from the business, and the death of his sister Elsa, who killed herself shortly after remarrying her husband in 1920, likely weighed heavily on Billy. He was in the first-floor office of the mansion when he fired that fatal self-inflicted gunshot. It's hard to believe, but even after 2 suicides in the mansion and 1 suspected suicide by a sister at her own estate, there was even more tragedy awaiting the Lemp family. Charles Lemp was the last member of the family to call the mansion his home.
Now, Charles. Charles was a middle brother, and he was very attached to so many things. He was a very quiet man. He was a very introverted man. Some say he was a sourpuss. His brothers used to call him that. But he just was very analytical. He liked math, and he ended up in the banking business. But he was still living in the house at 1910. And Billy, his older brother, wanted to change the mansion into the offices. So he forcefully, I guess, encouraged his brother to find his own way. And so he created this estate for himself. But he had been withdrawing even more. He had become what we call today a germaphobe. He didn't like people around him. And so he decided to travel, and he was becoming ill on his travels, and he was sending all the things that he purchased. Now, he was a collector, and so he purchased all kinds of riches all over the world and had them sent back to St. Louis, but never to his estate. He always had them sent back to the Lemp Mansion. So when he became too ill to travel, he came back there too and opened up the house again and began to live there. And he lived there from the 1930s until his death in 1949. He lived there only with 2 servants and his dog, and his dog's name was Serva. Now that's a communication too that I received of her name. And so he was always attached. He chose the bedroom upstairs because it had been his grandparents' room. Well, then, even though there was an elevator there, the servants were having a hard time taking care of him, so they moved him downstairs. And they gutted this little room that had been a small, cozy little library into a bedroom for him. And so on May 10th, 1949, they found him dead in that room. He had shot himself, and he had also shot his dog to take her with him. He's the one who left the suicide note, the only one.
1 family, 4 suicides. 3 of them within the walls of the Lemp Mansion. With so much tragedy, it's not surprising that spirits linger in the historic location. And there are more than just the spirits of those who killed themselves. After Charlie Lemp died, the home eventually turned into a boarding house where an untold number of souls crossed its threshold, and it's likely that there are also a number of deaths that went unrecorded in the mansion. Betsy has encountered a number of spirits and believes that at least most of them are still trying to fulfill a purpose.
Julia, who died of cancer, is a spirit there. Now, she's there because she wanders and she's looking for one of her sons. Now, this is where a little bit of leap of faith comes in, because some people don't believe this child ever existed. I was given his name as Zeke from Billy, but it could be a pet name or a nickname, but other people call him some pretty ugly things. He was a deformed, disabled child, and he was very challenged in so many ways. But he was well loved by his family. But, there is not a lot of proof of that. There's no birth certificate. There is an unmarked grave in their mausoleum. And apparently, from my communication again, he died of a fall. Now, a fall could have been something from down a ladder, down a flight of steps, something like that. He suffered from a lot of deformities, and some people have likened it to what the Elephant Man would have looked like. This disease, I believe they call it, with the growths and the enlarged head and so forth. So, and Zeke is a spirit there. So we've got 5 Lemp family members. We've got a servant that I have first encountered when I first started working there. Very dormant, not much about her. Her name is Sarah. There's a little girl spirit that I've encountered numerous times, and other people have too. And then there's this man who I'm not sure where he fits in. Now, he was identified by me because I ran into him, and he kind of surrounded me with a really stinky smell. Someone suggested I call him Oscar. I went, I love that nice old-fashioned name, but then he said, this was a guy on tour, he said, I know, you know who Oscar is. He lives in a garbage can, he smells real bad, and he's real nasty. Because this Oscar guy didn't like people around him, like, leave me alone, if it's my house, leave me alone. So there's 9, according to me.
While Betsy admits that her encounters with the entities residing within the Lemp Mansion can be unsettling, she says that she has rarely felt threatened. There was one night in particular, however, that stands out in her memory, as her most terrifying experience.
The first time I spent the night there, I was downstairs on the first floor sleeping on a cot, more or less, and it was very late, and I was really scared. First time I had spent the night there, I was in the middle of the hallway, and I did have an assistant with me, and he was sleeping on the couch fairly close to me, and I felt someone walking around the bed, and pounding footsteps, boom, 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 and stopping and leaning over me and making this god-awful piercing noise. I just kept repeating to myself, or to him, I guess, I'm too scared, you gotta go away, I'm too scared, you gotta go away. So there have been many times that I've been not only startled, but downright really scared.
Spiritual activity is not uncommon in the Lemp Mansion, which today serves as a restaurant and inn. Guests will often share their experiences with Betsy, as well as photos of unexplainable images caught on cell phones and digital cameras. One such photo in particular stands out to Betsy, who has an explanation for the odd photo.
Well, when people bring me pictures, I just absolutely love it. There was not too long ago, a woman shared a picture, and she was on the second floor in one of the bathrooms, just looking around. She didn't even have her camera. She had a phone camera going, and her phone, I think the flash might have gone off or something. So she walked out in the hallway to see what she had, and she just saw the tub and the shower, and then she looked above where it was, and there's a figure of, it looks like Charles Lemp to me, looking in the window. Now the window's on the second floor, mind you, so it wasn't a person.
Even in a mansion the size of the Lemp Mansion, with more than 30 rooms, the 9 spirits Betsy says still reside there may seem like a large number. But with so much history and tragedy in one building, these lingering spirits are to be expected, Betsy says.
Spirits usually remain in an earthbound state because of the manner of their death. So there you have 4 suicides. You have maybe other deaths that were sudden. Service death, obviously, the dog was shot, so she remained there. The spirit doesn't cross. It doesn't get to that point where it's going to the next level or crossing through the light or whatever you want to call it. So it stays in that earthbound state. Now, it could be their choice as well, that they feel they've got something unfinished, or they've got some amends to make, or maybe someone on the other side makes them so totally anxious or angry or fearful that they don't cross. So there's all those aspects why a spirit stays in an earthbound state. Most spirits do cross over, and they go on to either their eternal bliss, and sometimes they can come back to us too as little visits. We call them spirit guides.
But one spirit guide is noticeably missing. William J. Lemp Sr., the man who renamed the brewery after the family and who was the first to kill himself in the historic mansion back in 1904, has not yet been seen. His death was the first tragic one on the property, so why would he still not be present in the home? Betsy has a theory.
I've been doing this for a long time, and I have never encountered his spirit. I've encountered his story, but never his spirit. And I have a feeling, and this is my theory, that at the moment of his passing, that his son Frederick, who had been the son that died, that he was there and helped him in that transition. So he didn't linger as an earthbound spirit.
The Lemp family is a staple of St. Louis history and a part of the beer brewing culture of the Gateway City. While the brewery named after the family is no longer operational, the complex still stands near the mansion. The Pointer family, who now own and run the Lemp Mansion restaurant and inn, actively embrace and respect the legends of the family and those who passed through its doorways so many years ago. And that attitude has helped the family and Betsy fulfill a mission on behalf of the Lemps.
I do feel that I have a responsibility maybe, or a mission, or that they're trying to let me know, because I'm very respectful of them. I am. I give the story as I know it. Is respect for their home. It is their home. I think Billy Lemp and I have that affinity because I looked beyond the fact that he was kind of a brutal man and looked for the why was he a brutal man? What happened to him? And I think that he appreciated that. But with Charles particularly, that is his home. He wants his home to be respected. And that's what makes them angry, is disrespect of their family, of their story. And if I have conveyed anything since the time I've been there, is the fact that people are more respectful when they're around me. So that would be what I think that they're using me through, is to get their story there and to let people know that they are still there.
Phantom History is written, edited, and produced by me, Steve Blanchard. Thank you to Betsy Bernett Belanger for sharing the history of the Lemp Mansion and her paranormal expertise and encounters. Betsy gives historic and paranormal tours of the Lemp Mansion, which can be booked at lempmansion.com. Music for this episode is courtesy of Shane Ivers, Chad Crouch, and Raphael Crew. For photos of the Lemp Mansion, historic newspaper clips, and more on this interview with Betsy, visit phantomhistory.com or follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you enjoy Phantom History, please consider giving it a 5-star review on whatever platform you use to enjoy podcasts, and share the link with a friend. And, as always, thank you for listening. Hey, Steve here. Thanks so much for checking out that content. And before you go, I wanted to let you know that if you become a supporter of the podcast through Patreon, you'll gain access to bonus content. And if you subscribe to our newsletter at phantomhistory.com, we will let you know when that bonus content becomes available and when a new episode drops. And one more thing, I'm always looking for ideas for future episodes. So if you have an experience or a location you think that I should focus on, please let me know through the website, or you can email me directly at podcast@phantomhistory.com.